Hey everybody, I'm Chad. Thanks again for joining us for story time. Happy to have you here. So, today is March 1st and March is Women's History Month. So today we're going to share some fun stories about important women in history. Stick around, join us, and we've got some fun craft instructions for you too. All right, so we are going to feature what's called a biography of some important women. And a biography is just a story written about another person. So our first story today is a biography about Dorothy Vaughan, computer scientist. Dorothy Vaughan was a computer during the 1940s and 50s. But she wasn't a computer like the computers you might see at school. Dorothy was a human computer. She could do math very quickly, and she always figured out the right answer, even if it took a while. Numbers made sense to Dorothy. In school, she studied very hard and went to college. Back then, it was unusual for a woman to go to college. It was even more unusual for an African American woman to go to college. But she did, and she finished, and after college, Dorothy became a math teacher. Numbers still made sense to Dorothy, but she was only allowed to teach African American children. She didn't earn much money as a teacher. She worried about sending her own children to college. Dorothy looked for a new job that paid more money. One day, she spotted a notice on a bulletin board. The Langley Memorial Aeronautical Laboratory, that's a mouthful, was hiring human computers. Dorothy applied and got the job. This was in 1943, during World War II. Many people worked at Langley. This was where engineers tested new airplanes. They figured out how to make the airplanes better at taking off, flying, and landing. The engineers needed people good at math to help them. These people were the human computers. Most of the human computers were women. Most of the engineers were men. Dorothy loved working as a human computer. She loved working on solutions to problems. When World War II ended, the engineers at Langley went to work figuring out how to send people into space. Dorothy was excited to be part of the team. At Langley, the numbers made sense, but there was one thing that didn't make sense: segregation. Segregation was when black people and white people were forced to stay apart. At Langley, segregation was the rule. Black people and white people were made to work in different areas. African American women were on one team of computers, and white women were on another team. Dorothy didn't let this stop her. She worked hard. She worked smart. She became the first African American supervisor at Langley. Dorothy spoke up for equal rights for all people, whether they were black or white. That made sense to her. Langley stopped segregating people when the company became NASA in 1958. One day, Dorothy felt a strange vibration in the floorboards at Langley. Earthquake? Giant trucks? No. The shaking was caused by a computer. Not a human computer, an electronic computer. The electronic computer worked much faster than a human. How can I work with this machine? Dorothy asked herself. Dorothy decided to learn something new. This made sense to her. She went to classes and read books about computers and programming. Dorothy became an expert at writing computer code. She helped the other human computers learn computer code too. The work that Dorothy did with computers helped send a man into space. Dorothy never stopped learning, even when she was a very old woman. This just made sense to Dorothy. How inspiring. Dorothy Vaughan, computer scientist. That was great. And now we'll take a short break and we'll send things over to Taylor, who has a really fun craft to show you called quilling. I don't know if it has porcupines involved, but it's about quilling. Stay tuned.
Hey everybody, this is Taylor with the Marathon County Public Library here for some craft time. So our March project is going to be a quilled monster magnet. So if you don't know, quilling is an art form where you take strips of paper and you roll it to make some swirls and fun shapes. So quilling is pretty easy with the right materials. So all you need is a thin strip of paper and this is a coffee stirrer. So here we're gonna start wrapping it. The tighter the better. So you want it as tight and small as you can. So we're just gonna roll and I'll show you what the outcome is. You'll take off your paper and you have a really tight swirl like this. So now that you have your swirl, you're gonna wanna make it a little bit bigger for the base of your monster magnet. So you can stretch it out and you can even make it into fun shapes, like these little teardrops here. So you can make different shapes and then put them in with your base to create a fun monster magnet. Then once you have your body and head ready, you're gonna add some fun Google eyes, a mouth, and even some antennae. In your kit this month, you will have some strips of paper, a coffee stirrer, or a wooden skewer, and you will have some fun Google eyes to make your own monster magnets. Pick up your kit at any of the 9 MCPL locations anytime this month and have fun quilling.
Thanks a lot, Taylor. That looks really fun. And just a reminder, you can pick it up at any MCPL location in March. All right, on to a couple of stories from our next book, which is called Rad American Women, A to Z, by Katie Schatz and illustrated by Miriam Klein-Stahl. And rad, if you don't know what that means, just means really cool or really awesome. So this is about really awesome American women, A to Z. So we're gonna just pick out a few of them for you, maybe a couple or a few, we'll see. And H is for Hazel. So Hazel Scott was a musician. She played a particular kind of music called jazz. And she also acted on Broadway, on theater, lots of stuff. So let's learn a little bit more about Hazel Scott. One day when Hazel Scott was a very little girl, she walked up to the piano and began to play a church hymn. Hazel hadn't been taught to play the piano yet, and her mother, a piano teacher, watched in awe as Hazel played every note perfectly. After Hazel's parents divorced, her mother brought her talented daughter from their home in the island nation of Trinidad and Tobago, and if you don't know where that is, you can look it up on a map. It's in the Caribbean, to America. When she was only 8 years old, Hazel tried out for the Juilliard School of Music, which is a pretty important, fancy school of music. She was way too young. You had to be 16 to get in, but her mother convinced them to let her audition. Her performance was so impressive that she was offered a scholarship. Hazel was a musical genius, they said. Her career took off from there. Hazel's style combined classical music with jazz, blues, and swing, and she could sing in 7 languages. She went to school during the day, and in the evenings she was the hottest act at the best nightclubs in New York City. Soon she was acting on Broadway, and in 1950, she became the first African American to host her own television show, The Hazel Scott Show. Even though Hazel was famous, she still had to face racism in her life and in her career. A strong, outspoken woman, she never hesitated to speak up about injustice. She refused to play for any segregated audiences. And when she became a movie star, she challenged the way Hollywood treated non-white people. She demanded to be paid the same as white actors and refused to play roles that were demeaning to black people. Her strong beliefs made her a hero to many, but she also became a target for something called the House Committee on Un-American Activities, a group of paranoid politicians who put Hazel on their list of suspected communists. Even though she appeared before their committee to defend herself, they blacklisted her, which means they told people they could not hire Hazel. Her popular TV show was canceled and she moved to Paris, where she lived and played jazz music for many more years. Hazel never backed down from her principles and remained true to her amazing talent. So that's Hazel Scott. Now, let's hear, we'll just do two from this, but again, this is Rad American Women, and you can find this here at the library if you want to read more stories. And T is for Temple, which is Temple Grandin. Temple Grandin's parents knew she was different when she was just a baby. She didn't talk, laugh, or make eye contact, and she had enormous tantrums. Temple reacted strongly to loud sounds, scratchy fabrics, and strong smells. In 1949, when she was only 2 years old, a doctor diagnosed her with autism, a developmental disorder that affects behavior and communication. Everyone knew there was something wrong with Temple, but they didn't realize that a lot was right. Temple's mind was different, but it wasn't damaged, it was brilliant. Temple is a visual thinker. Her mind shows her pictures instead of words. As a child, she was an amazing artist, and she loved to design and build things. But talking to people made her uncomfortable, like an anthropologist from Mars, she says. And she was bullied constantly. She struggled in school until she found something she could truly relate to. Once, during a visit to a cattle ranch, Temple felt a deep connection to the horses and cows. She knew that the animals had feelings, but that they couldn't express them with words. This was exactly how she'd always felt herself. Temple realized that autistic people and animals have a lot in common. She started getting ideas for ways that farmers and ranchers could help their animals feel safe and happy. Using her drawing skills and her visual mind, she started to design pens and walkways and devices and buildings that would improve the animals' quality of life. At first, many ranchers and farmers didn't want to work with her. They thought her ideas were strange, and they didn't think an autistic woman could help them. But once they saw how the animals reacted to her and how well her ideas worked, they started to listen. Dr. Temple Grandin has written several books, worked as a college professor, and given speeches all over the world. She has dedicated her life to reducing the suffering and anxiety of animals and to educating people about autism and the mind. Good for her. T is for Temple Grandin. All right, wood, wire, and wings. To Emma Lillian Todd, problems were like gusts of wind. They set her mind soaring. Sometimes the problems seemed small, like where to find metal to craft her inventions. Solution, she saved tin cans from supper. But soon Lillian's challenges ballooned. Lillian grew up in a time when it seemed like everyone was tinkering, including Lillian's grandfather, who invented his own carriage wheel. Just like grandfather, Lillian whittled and fiddled, turning dreams into useful inventions. One winter, Lillian rescued a broken toy from the trash and snatched a ball off the Christmas tree. She trimmed and twisted, fiddled and fitted, and she made a weather vane. Would the weather vane work? Lillian took it outside for a test. When the wind blew, the weather vane pointed true. Success! Yay. Another day, she took apart a clock, spreading the pieces before her. Did this wheel fit here? Did that lever fit there? She put the pieces back this way. No tick. She put the pieces back that way. No tock. The clock stayed still. Failure! Lillian stood baffled, yet buoyed by the challenge. Lillian couldn't imagine a life without tools or tin, wires or wheels, yet inventing wasn't women's work. So she did the next best thing. She got a job typing up plans for new machines at the U.S. Patent Office. While Lillian's fingers raced across the keys, she constructed each contraption in her mind. Click, clack, ding, zip. Soon blueprints for fantastical flying machines flooded the office. But could they really fly? Lillian needed to know. Lillian fixed her eyes on a new horizon, a future of flight. She tinkered with tiny aircraft in her tiny Manhattan apartment after long days of typing, winding rubber-banded propellers to send small airships soaring, stitching balloons which bobbed and bounced from the ceiling. While Lillian tinkered and tested, other inventors flew their first full-sized airplanes. But when she read the news, she simply shook her head. Their designs still seemed fantastical, not practical. Lillian vowed to build something better, an airplane with sloping wings, to glide like a bird, and a cockpit for two. Lillian spent hours considering the crows circling overhead, studying the angle of an albatross's wing, and constructing models that hung like chandeliers from the ceiling. Before long, her airplane took over her apartment. Then it took over her life. Amidst the parts and pieces, Lillian's bird emerged from bamboo covered in canvas. At last, she strapped a doll into the basket and sent it soaring. It dipped, then dove straight down, crash! The airplane and its passenger smashed to pieces. With a second model, Lillian's hopes took flight once more, but her model didn't. Failure! Lillian stood there baffled, but buoyed by the challenge. And then on the third try, her model slipped into the sky until, wasp! A slight mishap when a wire snapped, yet it was a breakthrough. Now Lillian knew an airplane built from her design could fly. By 1908, Lillian realized her ballooning project couldn't cram into her apartment. She was simply short on space and short on money, too. What could Lillian do to keep her dream aloft? Why, tackle each setback one by one, like a pilot ticking off a checklist. Get money, check. She asked Olivia Sage, one of the richest women in the world. Find space, check. She hired the Whitman brothers to assemble the airplane at their plant. Sketch a frame of sturdy spruce, check. Buy supplies, muslin, army duck, and piano wire to put it all together, check, check, and double check. A year later, there was one box left to tick. Find an engine. At that time, suitable airplane engines were hard to come by, as scarce as women working with wood and wire. Instead, Lillian had to make do with a car engine. At last, her plane was ready for takeoff. An airplane crafted by a woman was quite a curiosity. So, no surprise, Lillian chose to showcase her plane at the 1909 Interborough Fair in New York, where it captivated crowds alongside cannons catapulting ladies through the sky. As the fairgoers crushed close, Lillian readied her plane for liftoff, but the engine sputtered. The plane shuddered. It wouldn't budge at all. Failure. Buoyed by the challenge, Lillian brainstormed her next steps. Secure space to work throughout the winter, check. Study motors and revise her design, check. Score another engine, an airplane engine, double check. Since the engine company crafted just 2 a month, Lillian knew she would have to wait and wait and wait some more for almost a year while tweaking and tinkering with her design. When the engine finally arrived in the fall of 1910, Lillian checked the final box, install the engine. She gave it a whirl. The new engine purred. The propeller whirred. Lillian's dreams were ready to soar once more. On November 7th, 1910, cars lined a road along a field and crowds crushed close to watch the latest marvels, daring pilots demonstrating flying machines. Some were fantastical. Others, like Lillian's, were quite practical. As the day dragged on, slicing icy winds whipped across the plain. One pilot scuttled his flight, declaring it too windy to fly. Lillian worried about the weather. Should she wait and waste her chance? Lillian wouldn't wing it. She had waited 4 years to see her plane lift off. She could wait a few moments more. When the winds died down, Lillian made her final checks and found the best spot to study her airplane's every dip and dive. At last, Lillian's pilot drove the plane onto the field, bouncing across the grass, picking up speed faster, 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 until success! It lifted off, soaring toward the future. A future filled with flying. Wow, she makes it sound pretty exciting. Maybe you'll build an airplane someday, or maybe you'll spend some time this month learning more about important women in history. Thank you so much again for joining us today. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time.